The Russian Federation has accused Ukraine of leaking the terms of peace or negotiation conditions put forward by the Russian Federation. And they claim Ukraine is leaking this publicly on a large scale to the American and European press. Today, Dmitriev wrote about this. He is an advisor to Putin. Here, the United States is promoting a peaceful path in Ukraine. So why is the Ukrainian delegation leaking confidential negotiations at the White House to their friends in the EU, the UK, and the press? I think that this post is now, key regarding what actually happened on Friday behind closed doors during the negotiations between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. As for the negotiations, they were not public. The joint press statements took place before the conversation happened. After that, there was a lunch, and during lunch, Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky talked about something for 2.5 hours. Many people are speculating about what it could have been, but there is one key point. Immediately after the conversation, Volodymyr Zelensky called European partners to share his interpretation of what he heard from Donald Trump, why the supply of long-range Tomahawk missiles was denied, and in general, what topics were discussed there. According to its own sources, the Washington Post reports that Steve Witkoff is pressuring Volodymyr Zelensky for Ukraine to agree to the demands of the Russian Federation regarding the transfer of the non-occupied part of Donbas, 28% of the territory of Donetsk region. Russia very much wants to see these areas within its occupation, and in exchange, it is supposedly ready to give up small sections that it currently controls in the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. Let me go back once more. There's another publication, quite interesting, but I want to return again to Kirill Dmitriev's post about Ukraine supposedly leaking something, these so-called confidential negotiations. Accordingly, we can therefore conclude that the demands voiced by the Americans to Ukraine following the Trump-Putin phone call are indeed real. If the Kremlin is showing signs of nervousness, it means that the issue of territories is an important and key one, and it could be brought up for negotiations in Budapest in 2 or 3 weeks. This is currently, at this particular moment in time, the main and most significant stumbling block that, in fact, truly makes it essentially impossible, at least for now, to find any sort of common ground or mutual understanding between Kyiv and Moscow. Ukraine's position today is unequivocal. No territories, especially those not yet seized, will be handed over to the Russian Federation. No one will surrender Donbas, declared Volodymyr Zelensky. However, Volodymyr Zelensky also stated that we have moved closer to peace. It's not certain that this peace will happen, but we have come closer to it. All of this indicates that the Kremlin has become nervous because its demands have now become public. And why, in fact, are they nervous? Because the demand for territories that the Russian Federation is currently unable to seize by military means demonstrates 2 things. First, that Russia is the aggressor. The Russian Federation is an aggressor fighting for territory. Second, the so-called Second Army in the world is unable to capture these territories by military means. Accordingly, the defense forces of Ukraine, with the support of Europeans and Americans, are currently conducting a rather effective defensive operation. And this shows that, there was once a statement from Donald Trump about a paper tiger. Well, maybe not a paper tiger, but definitely not a tiger. Yes, definitely not a tiger, the Russian Federation. That's why there's so much nervousness going on. The large-scale leak that appeared in the press, I think, refers specifically to this material. This is a Financial Times article that describes the details of the meeting, citing European high-ranking officials who were not present at the meeting. How could they know this? Well, probably from Volodymyr Zelensky. The maps that Volodymyr Zelensky was showing were supposedly flying off the table. Donald Trump was sweeping them away, saying he wasn't interested in any of it. It is necessary to concede territories and stop the fighting, at least along the front line. Shouting, emotional instability, and in fact, those conditions from the Russian Federation that were voiced by the Americans suggesting that Ukraine supposedly has to agree to all of this. By the way, Donald Trump has now backtracked. There is a lot of confusion about whether the territorial issue was actually raised or not during the meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. Zelensky says it was raised, that it was Steve Witkoff who brought it up. He was the one pressing on the territorial issue. Donald Trump says that this issue was not raised. But in the end, somehow Donald Trump is now striking a balance on his main point. And here is his latest live comment, which basically repeats his post regarding the cessation of hostilities along the front line. And now this is the main condition, not only one that Kyiv has to accept, but also one that Moscow must recognize and accept as well. That is obvious.
With President Zelensky, as you know, today, and we had a very good meeting, very cordial meeting. In my opinion, they should stop the war immediately. You go by the battle line wherever it is, otherwise it's too complicated. You'll never be able to figure it out. You stop at the battle line and both sides should go home, go to their families, stop the killing, and that should be it. Stop right now at the battle line. I told that to President Zelensky. I told it to President Putin. Thank you very much, everybody.
So, in fact, this is the main thesis and the cornerstone. Well, essentially, this is the backbone on which the preparations for the upcoming Trump-Putin summit will be built. Accordingly, the Kremlin now has 2 weeks to digest all of this, analyze it, and as a result, make a concession that they themselves consider a concession and their own defeat, namely to give up the not yet conquered Donbas. This is a red line for the Kremlin, and all these leaks to the press, as well as Donald Trump's statements, and accordingly, Volodymyr Zelensky's rhetoric, are seen in the Kremlin as an information attack. Moreover, this information attack is happening today, not only from the West against the Russian Federation, but clearly something is also happening inside the Russian Federation itself. Because there is a party of peace, friends. There are many representatives of the regional elites who have had enough of these insane payments for the special military operation, who are fed up with the constant draining of regional budgets in favor of the military-industrial complex, in favor of the war. All this has been going on for 4 years, plus there are sanctions. And if Putin, let's say, has 300 billion in his pocket for the war every year, the interregional elites no longer have that kind of money. And the political, at least, dissatisfaction. This is not about social protests, uprisings, or anything like that. It's simply political dissatisfaction and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Here's what is written by a certain Telegram channel, Kremlin Tabakerka. By the way, the Telegram channel is quite tabloid, but it's connected to Sergei Kirienko, who is basically Putin's right-hand man. So here's what they write. They, of course, write this from their own perspective, as a negative trend, but they do acknowledge this trend. So a major information attack is being prepared against Vladimir Vladimirovich. And under this cover, who knows, maybe not just an information attack. We see all the challenges and are preparing to defend our president. This is being stated by a source close to Putin. So it's quite a bad situation, and the voice of America is quite noticeable. The situation became especially unstable after Trump raised the bar in his rhetoric regarding tomahawks and the threat for the Russian Federation. Of course, the threat is Ukraine potentially acquiring such long-range weapons as Tomahawk missiles, and even with launchers. This, well, was quite a difficult situation to digest in principle. That is why when this rhetoric reached its peak, Putin, on his own initiative, and this is a fact, got in direct contact with Donald Trump. They spoke on the phone specifically about the Tomahawks. And obviously something was said that Trump liked, because such a rollback, the refusal to provide Ukraine with Tomahawks, no guarantees of further military support, no kind of militant rhetoric. This was something the Europeans really disliked. Today, there is already a comment from the Germans, from Chancellor Merz, saying that, well, this meeting was an absolute failure. Ukraine has not achieved, nor have the Europeans, any objectives or any guarantees that military support, at least under the Pearl program, will continue and be specifically initiated by Washington. There is none of that right now. Europeans need to be ready and prepare 120 billion for Ukraine. That's the mood in Europe today. That's how things feel right now. But friends, the fact that Putin called Trump and that elements of this information attack are already being actively displayed, at least in the European press, is significant. The fact that things are already shaking in the Kremlin and that a major information attack is being prepared against Vladimir Vladimirovich, all of this is part of the same thing. The tremendous pressure that is being exerted on Putin today, I think this is, well, honestly, 99% true. And if Putin actually gives in, we will definitely see it, perhaps quite clearly, in just one simple example. Rumors about a partial demobilization have been circulating for several months now, but the issue keeps getting postponed, and postponed. Now, this issue is once again coming to the forefront, and the Z channels are writing that there is information suggesting that Putin might announce a partial demobilization for those who have been fighting since 2022 in the so-called special military operation format. This is 20, maybe 25,000 servicemen of the Russian Federation who could return home as early as December. This order could be signed in December. If this happens, it will mean only one thing. The large-scale information attack against Vladimir Vladimirovich is working. So that's how it is. That's the information for today, which is basically also becoming public. So when Dmitriev says that Ukraine is leaking something, friends, it's not just Ukraine leaking information. It's also the Kremlin channel, Kremlovskaya Tabakerka, that's leaking as well.